So here's something kind of wild to think about. One of the longest-running animated shows in American television history, a show that has earned over $250 million in merchandise, won 5 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, got nominated for an Oscar, got banned in multiple countries, and has been on the air for 28 straight years. Started as a college project made with construction paper and glue. That's not an exaggeration, that's literally what happened. 2 film students at the University of Colorado made a 4-minute short film using scissors and an old camera, and somehow that turned into South Park, a show with 338 episodes, 28 seasons, a $1 billion franchise deal, and enough controversy to fill an entire Wikipedia article. But the path from that little construction paper short to one of the most important shows in television history is honestly one of the coolest origin stories you'll ever hear. And that's just fact number 1 out of 100 that we're going to get through tonight. So get comfortable, grab your blanket, because we're going to be here for a while and there's a lot of really cool stuff to talk about. Let's go back to 1992. Trey Parker and Matt Stone are film students at the University of Colorado. They met in a film class that year and immediately bonded over a shared obsession with Monty Python, which they still cite as one of their biggest creative inspirations to this day. And if you've ever watched South Park's animation style and thought it looked kind of familiar, there's a reason for that. The jerky, two-dimensional, cutout look of South Park was directly inspired by Terry Gilliam's paper cutout animations from Monty Python's Flying Circus. That's where the whole visual language of the show comes from. 2 college kids who loved Monty Python so much that they basically built an entire empire around that same animation philosophy. Before South Park even existed as a concept, Parker was already making weird student films. He was working on something called Giant Beavers of southern Sri Lanka. And I know that sounds made up, but it's real. Parker described it to Rolling Stone as sort of a Godzilla thing, but with a huge beaver. I had a little girl dressed in a beaver costume rampaging a town. So yeah, this is the kind of creative brain we're dealing with here. The man who would go on to write some of the sharpest television satire of the last 3 decades was, at one point, filming a girl in a beaver costume destroying a miniature city. But once Parker got close to Stone, they came up with something better. The film department at their university screened student films at the end of each semester, and the next set of screenings happened to fall right before Christmas. So the 2 of them decided to make a holiday-themed short. They called it The Spirit of Christmas. They animated it using nothing but construction paper, scissors, glue, and a very old 8mm film camera. The whole thing was about 4 minutes long. It featured 4 foul-mouthed kids in Colorado who accidentally bring a snowman to life. And then things go sideways fast. The snowman starts killing people, and the kids end up getting Jesus involved to help take it down. Classic Parker and Stone even back then. Now here's a funny detail about this short that most people don't know. In that original 1992 version, the fat kid who would eventually become Eric Cartman was actually named Kenny. And the hooded kid who looks like the Kenny we know today wasn't given a name at all. So the characters were basically swapped around before the show ever made it to television. The Kenny we know and love, the one who dies in every episode, started as a nameless background character in a student film. And Cartman started out with Kenny's name. It's one of those weird origin details that completely changes how you think about the show's earliest DNA. Parker and Stone premiered that short at their school's December 1992 film screening, and then they moved on with their lives. They turned their attention to making their debut feature film, Cannibal, the musical, which is a comedic musical take on the story of Colorado cannibal Alfred Packer. And the construction paper short might have been completely forgotten if it weren't for a Fox broadcasting executive named Brian Graydon. Graydon had seen the short and loved it. In 1995, he cut Parker and Stone a personal check for $2,000 to make another animated short that he could use as a video Christmas card to send around to his Hollywood friends. $2,000. That's the entire budget that set the South Park franchise in motion. Parker and Stone took the money and spent what they described as a week of no sleep, creating the second Spirit of Christmas short, this time featuring Jesus fighting Santa Claus over the true meaning of the holiday. This version was much closer to what South Park would eventually become. The kids were named Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny for the first time. There's even a character who looks like Wendy Testaburger sitting on Santa's lap. The animation style was basically identical to the show's first season. And here's the thing, the short reportedly had a budget of about $750, with Parker and Stone keeping the rest of their $2,000 commission. So one of the most important animated shorts in television history cost less than a month's rent. Now here's where things get really interesting. Groudon sent VHS copies of the short to a few dozen people in the industry just as a Christmas card. But it spread like wildfire. Hollywood people started making copies and passing them around. George Clooney was actually one of the biggest champions of the short, personally making copies and giving them to everyone he could. Before the internet was really a thing for video sharing, this little construction paper cartoon became one of the very first viral videos. People were trading VHS tapes like they were bootleg concert recordings. It was completely organic. There was no marketing budget, no studio backing, just a funny short film that people couldn't stop sharing. And because of that buzz, Parker and Stone suddenly had options. They started negotiating with both MTV and Comedy Central. Parker was worried that MTV would turn South Park into a kids' show, which is hilarious when you think about what the show actually became. Comedy Central executive Doug Herzog watched the short, saw the potential, and commissioned the development of the series. And by August 13th, 1997, South Park premiered on Comedy Central with the episode Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. That pilot episode holds a really interesting distinction in animation history. It was produced using actual construction paper and traditional stop-motion photography, just like the original shorts. No computers, just hands moving little paper cutouts frame by frame. The process took approximately 3 months to complete, which is why every episode after that switched to computer animation. They kept the same jerky, handmade look, but they did it digitally so they could actually produce episodes on a reasonable schedule. And by reasonable, I mean the completely unreasonable 6-day schedule that the show would eventually become famous for. But we'll get to that in a bit. Something else about that premiere that a lot of people don't realize is that South Park was the very first weekly television program to receive a TVMA rating. Before South Park, no weekly series had ever carried that rating. It was always reserved for movies or one-off specials. South Park changed that. From day one, the show was pushing boundaries in ways that the television industry hadn't really seen before, and the rating system had to adapt to accommodate it. Before we move on, there's one more detail about the show's origin that I really like. Parker and Stone named their first production company Avenging Conscience, after a D.W. Griffith film that they actively disliked. It wasn't an homage. They named their company after a movie they thought was bad, which honestly feels very on-brand for the two guys who would go on to make South Park. During their college years, they would shoot a new short film every single week under that banner, though most of those shorts are now lost to time. We only know about the ones that survived, which is kind of a shame. Somewhere out there in the universe, there are dozens of lost Trey Parker and Matt Stone student films that nobody will ever see. Now let's talk about the theme song for a second, because there are some genuinely cool facts about it. The South Park theme was composed and performed by the band Primus, specifically by their frontman Les Claypool. And the story of how it came together is pretty great. Parker and Stone were big fans of Primus, so they approached the band and offered them $74 and a copy of The Spirit of Christmas to write the theme song. $74 for a theme song that would go on to be heard hundreds of millions of times. Les Claypool originally recorded a version that was about 40 seconds long, but Comedy Central rejected it because they said it was too slow. So Claypool had to re-record his vocals at a faster tempo. He actually did the re-recording during a concert tour at Fiddler's Green Amphitheater, which is a venue in Colorado. And the final version of the song runs at exactly 144 beats per minute in 4/4 time. The version that appeared in the unaired pilot was noticeably slower than what eventually made it to broadcast. And honestly, if you go back and listen to it, it feels like a completely different song. The tempo change made a huge difference. The theme song would go on to be re-recorded and remixed multiple times over the show's history, which is something we'll get into later. But right from the start, the music was a collaboration between a cult rock band and two broke film school graduates, and it became one of the most recognizable theme songs in television history, all because Primus said yes to $74 and a VHS tape. So that's how South Park went from a student film made with construction paper and an 8mm camera to a show that would change television forever. Two guys who met in film class, bonded over Monty Python, made a Christmas card that went viral before viral was even a word, and somehow turned that into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. The whole journey from that 1992 student screening to the August 1997 premiere on Comedy Central took about 5 years. And in those 5 years, the total investment to get the show made was basically $2,000 from a Fox executive and $74 to a rock band. The entire foundation of one of the biggest animated franchises in history cost less than a used car. And that's just the beginning, because what happened after the show premiered, the production secrets, the hidden Easter eggs, the controversies, the banned episodes, all of that stuff is somehow even more interesting than the origin story. So let's keep going. When South Park first started airing, each episode took a few months to produce. That pilot with the actual construction paper took about 3 months by itself. But starting around season 4, Trey Parker and Matt Stone completely changed the way the show was made. They moved to what became known as the 6-day production cycle, and it is genuinely one of the most insane production schedules in the entire entertainment industry. Here's how it works. The cycle begins on a Thursday morning. Parker, Stone, and a team of writing consultants sit down and start brainstorming concepts. Parker drafts the script. Then approximately 70 people, including animators, editors, and sound engineers, work around the clock for the next 6 days, pulling 100 to 120-hour weeks. The finalized episode gets transmitted via satellite uplink to Comedy Central on Wednesday, sometimes arriving just hours before the 10 p.m. broadcast. To put that in perspective, a typical animated sitcom like The Simpsons or Family Guy takes 8 to 9 months to produce a single episode. South Park does it in less than a week, and they've been doing it that way for over 20 years. The whole process was actually documented in a special called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, which premiered on Comedy Central on October 9th, 2011. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend tracking it down. It follows the creation of the season 15 premiere from the very first brainstorming session to the final satellite transmission, and watching it is genuinely stressful. You can feel the pressure these people are under. The reason Parker and Stone do it this way is actually pretty interesting. They've said in interviews that subjecting themselves to a 1-week deadline creates more spontaneity in the creative process, and they believe that spontaneity makes for a funnier show. But the real benefit is that it allows South Park to respond to current events faster than any other animated show on television. And I mean way faster. In 2005, the season 9 episode Best Friends Forever referenced the Terry Schiavo case and originally aired less than 12 hours before she actually died. 12 hours. The show's commentary on that story hit the airwaves while the story itself was still happening. In 2003, the season 7 finale. It's Christmas in Canada referenced the discovery of Saddam Hussein in a spider hole and his subsequent capture, which happened only 3 days before the episode aired. 3 days to write, animate, voice, edit, and broadcast a joke about something that just happened. That's the power of the 6-day production cycle. And in 2000, the Season 4 episode Quintuplets 2000 referenced the Border Patrol's raid during the Elian Gonzalez affair, an event that occurred only 4 days before the episode originally aired. No other animated show in history has been able to turn around topical comedy that quickly. It's the thing that makes South Park fundamentally different from every other cartoon on television. But that speed comes with a cost. The production team works brutally hard, and things don't always go smoothly. In 2013, a power outage at the studio actually delayed the Season 17 premiere episode. When your entire production timeline is measured in days and not months, losing even a few hours to a blackout is a disaster. Everything has to go right for the system to work, and when it doesn't, there's essentially no margin for error. And in 2025, things went even further sideways. Parker and Stone actually missed the production deadline on the 5th episode of Season 27. They issued a public apology that read, and I love this quote, "Apparently, when you do everything at the last minute, sometimes you don't get it done." That is so perfectly South Park. They've been running this impossible schedule for 20 plus years, and when it finally caught up to them, they just owned it in the most on-brand way possible. Let's talk about how the animation itself has changed over the years, because the technical evolution of South Park is honestly fascinating. In the early seasons, the production team digitized actual construction paper cutouts using scanners, and then animated them using CorelDRAW and Alias Power Animator on Silicon Graphics workstations. If you don't know what any of those things are, don't worry. The point is that it was a really clunky, labor-intensive process that relied on hardware and software that hasn't been widely used in decades. By Season 5, the entire pipeline had transitioned to Autodesk Maya, which is the industry-standard 3D animation software. They still use Maya today, along with Apple Motion for modern visual effects. But the genius of it is that even though the show is now made with cutting-edge software, it's specifically engineered to look like it was still made with construction paper. The whole aesthetic is a deliberate throwback to that original student film from 1992. Here's another production detail that I think is really cool. Seasons 1 through 12 were originally produced in standard definition with a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is that old square-shaped TV format. But at some point, the production team went back and re-rendered every single one of those early episodes from the original archived Maya and Alias Power Animator scene files to full 1080p HD in 16:9 widescreen. So when you watch Season 1 of South Park on streaming today, you're actually watching a version of it that didn't exist when it originally aired. The show has been retroactively upgraded, and because they kept the original digital files from every episode, they were able to do it without losing any quality. Starting with Season 13 in 2009, the show has been produced natively in 16:9 high-definition 1080p. So from that point forward, what you see is what was originally created. But everything before that is essentially a remaster. Now, how much does all of this cost? In the early days, each episode cost approximately $250,000 to $300,000 to produce. The pilot was more expensive because of the stop-motion construction paper process, but regular episodes settled into that range pretty quickly. The current per-episode costs haven't been publicly disclosed, but we can make some educated guesses based on the deals that have been signed. And speaking of deals, this is a big one. In July 2025, Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a $1.5 billion extension deal with Paramount Global. That deal guarantees 50 new episodes at roughly 10 per year and secures the show through at least 2029 or 2030, $1.5 billion, for a show that started with a $2,000 budget for a Christmas card. That is one of the wildest financial trajectories in entertainment history. There's actually an interesting backstory to the timing of Season 27 as well. Parker and Stone publicly stated in September 2024 that they intentionally delayed the season until 2025 specifically to avoid parodying Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. which is kind of ironic when you consider how much political satire the show has done over the years. They satirized the 2000 election, the 2016 election, the capture of Saddam Hussein, the entire Obama presidency, and the entire Trump presidency. But in 2024, they just decided they didn't want to deal with it. They took a year off from election comedy, which honestly might be the most contrarian thing they've ever done. One more production fact before we move on. Trey Parker has personally directed 317 episodes of South Park as of 2025. That's an absurd number. Matt Stone has directed 9. Parker's also the lead writer, credited on 325 episodes. The man basically is the show. Stone is incredibly important as a co-creator, voice actor, and business partner, but in terms of the day-to-day creative output, Parker's the engine that drives South Park. He writes, directs, and voices most of the characters. When you watch an episode of South Park, you are watching something that is largely the product of one man's brain, filtered through a production team that has been working together for nearly 3 decades. And the studio where all of this happens isn't even in Colorado. Despite the show being set in a small Colorado mountain town, South Park Studios is located in Culver City, California. The fictional town of South Park is actually modeled on the real South Park Basin and the Fairplay area in Colorado, which is where Parker and Stone drew inspiration from when they were creating the show. But the actual production happens in Los Angeles. It's just one of those funny little disconnects between what the show is about and where the show is made. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the show's production pretty hard too. Season 24 was disrupted so severely that it was reduced from a normal season to just 2 long-form special episodes. Instead of the usual batch of 22-minute episodes, the team pivoted to making longer specials that dealt directly with the pandemic. It was a completely different format, and it forced the show to adapt in ways it never had before. But honestly, some of the pandemic specials are really good. The show used its rapid production cycle to comment on the pandemic in near real time, which is exactly the kind of thing South Park does better than anyone else. So that's the production side of things. A 6-day production cycle that's been running for over 20 years. 70 people pulling 100-hour weeks. $1.5 billion deal. 300 plus episodes directed by one guy. And an animation pipeline that evolved from construction paper and scanners to Maya and Apple Motion, but still looks like it was made by a kid with safety scissors. It's one of the most remarkable production stories in all of television. Now let's shift gears and talk about some of the hidden details that the production team has been sneaking into the show for almost 3 decades. Because South Park is absolutely loaded with Easter eggs, and some of them have been hiding in plain sight since the very first episode. If you've been watching South Park for any length of time, you might have noticed something strange lurking in the backgrounds of certain episodes. Skinny, gray aliens. Little guys just standing there in a crowd, hiding behind a building, sitting in a car, blending into a scene like they belong there. These aliens are known as the Visitors, and they've been a part of South Park since the very first episode. In Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, the aliens are a major plot point, since they're the ones who, well, probe Cartman. But after that episode, they didn't just go away. The animators started hiding them in the backgrounds of episodes as a running Easter egg, and it became one of the most well-known hidden details in the entire show. For years, there was a rumor among fans that at least one hidden alien appeared in every single episode of South Park. And while that's not technically true, it was actually really close during the early seasons. The alien sightings were frequent enough that fans started cataloging them, frame by frame, screenshot by screenshot, building massive online databases of every visitor appearance they could find. Some of them are easy to spot if you know where to look, but others are genuinely hard to find. The aliens have been hidden in crowd scenes, painted on walls, tucked behind furniture, disguised as reflections in windows, drawn as door handles, shaped into bridge structures, and even placed inside ambulances way in the background where you'd never think to look. One particularly tricky one has an alien hidden as the top of Kyle's chair. Another one has aliens carved into the confessional inside a church. They're everywhere, and the animators clearly have a blast hiding them. The gag got so popular that in 2008, Comedy Central actually ran an official Find the Hidden Aliens contest during the first 7 episodes of season 12. They turned it into an interactive viewer experience where fans could compete to spot the most aliens. And I think that's when a lot of casual viewers first realized that this had been going on for years. It went from being an insider Easter egg that only hardcore fans knew about, to being an officially acknowledged part of the show's identity. And here's a cool detail that not a lot of people know. The hidden alien gag isn't limited to South Park. Parker and Stone hide aliens in all of their work. In Cannibal, the musical, their student feature film that came before South Park, there's a moment at the 1 minute and 29 second mark where a snowman's head briefly transforms into an alien head. It's there for just a fraction of a second. You'd never catch it unless you were looking for it. So the visitor Easter eggs predate South Park by several years. It's something Parker and Stone have been doing since the very beginning of their careers, and it's carried through everything they've made. Nobody in the town of South Park ever seems to notice the aliens, by the way. They're just there in the background, chilling, and the characters walk right past them without a second glance. After 28 years, I guess everybody is just used to them. Now let's talk about Kenny. Because Kenny McCormick might be the single greatest ongoing Easter egg in the history of television. Everybody knows that Kenny dies in almost every episode. That's the famous running gag. Stan says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Kyle says, "You bastards." And then Kenny is magically alive again in the next episode. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Kenny's dialogue, despite being almost completely muffled by his parka, is fully scripted. Every single mumbled line that comes out of Kenny's mouth was actually written, and a lot of those lines are incredibly vulgar. The most famous example of this is Kenny's verse in the theme song. And this is where things get really interesting, because his lyrics have changed multiple times over the show's run, and every version is explicit. During seasons 1 and 2, Kenny's muffled line was a comment about his preferences regarding certain features of the female body. I'll let you fill in the blanks on that one. Starting in season 3 through season 5, his lyrics changed to a boast about his anatomy that involved telling the listener how they could assist in cleaning it. Again, this is in the theme song of a show that aired on basic cable. When Kenny was permanently killed off at the end of season 5, his spot in the season 6 theme song was taken over by Timmy Birch, who sang "Timmy, Timmy, 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 livin' a lie, Timmy," which is somehow both the most innocent and the most unhinged replacement they could have chosen. Kenny came back in season 7, and his theme song lyrics changed again to a line about what he hoped to do to a certain pop star named Britney when he was old enough. This version ran through season 10. Then from season 10, episode 8 onward, his lyrics settled into their current form, which is a declaration about his feelings toward a certain type of woman and how his anatomy responds to them. None of these lines were ever censored because Kenny's voice is so muffled that nobody can actually understand what he's saying without subtitles or audio isolation. The censors technically never needed to step in. It's the most elegant workaround in the history of broadcast standards. And here's the cherry on top. When the show did a full orchestral re-recording of the theme song for season 25, they included Kenny's original seasons 1 and 2 lyrics, sung completely uncensored and unmuffled for the very first time. After 25 seasons of hiding behind a parka, Kenny's filthy lyrics were finally out in the open. And honestly, hearing them clearly after all those years is one of the funniest things the show has ever done. The theme song itself has gone through 6 distinct versions over the show's run, which is another detail a lot of fans don't fully appreciate. The original version from seasons 1 through mid-season 4 was the classic Primus recording, with the call and response vocals between Les Claypool and the boys. Then, from the episode 4th grade through the end of season 5, they switched to a techno and breakbeat remix done by Paul Robb. Seasons 6 through 10 used a bluegrass version that was still performed by Les Claypool, but without the rest of Primus since the band was on hiatus at the time. That version was played with a banjo, fiddle, harmonica, acoustic bass, and a washboard. Starting around mid-season 10, they switched to a rock and metal remix featuring Claypool's Wamola, which is this custom electric bass instrument he built. The visuals got a 3D computer animation update in season 17 while keeping the Wamola instrumental. And then season 25 brought the full orchestral version we just talked about. The first 3 Halloween episodes also had their own completely separate Halloween version of the theme, which is a detail that even a lot of dedicated fans don't know about. And during the pandemic specials and the Paramount Plus exclusive events, the show dropped the intro entirely. No theme song at all, just straight into the episode. Now, moving beyond the theme song, let me tell you about some of the personal Easter eggs that Parker and Stone have woven into the show from the very beginning. Stan Marsh's family members share the same first names as Trey Parker's real family. Kyle Broflovsky's parents share the same first names as Matt Stone's real parents. So when you're watching Stan's dad, Randy, do something insane, or Kyle's mom, Sheila, go on one of her crusades, you're watching characters named after the real parents of the guys who created the show, which adds a whole layer of comedy to some of those episodes, honestly. But the best personal Easter egg in South Park, and probably the one with the most interesting backstory, is Cartman's mom. Her name is Leanne Cartman, and she's named after Trey Parker's college girlfriend. Parker was engaged to a woman named Leanne. The wedding was planned, the honeymoon was set up, everything was ready, and then Parker caught her cheating on him with multiple guys. He was devastated. And how did he deal with it? He wrote Cannibal, the musical, the student film that predates South Park, and included a horse named Leanne that lets anyone ride her. That joke then carried directly over to South Park, where Cartman's mom became one of the most notoriously promiscuous characters in the entire show. Leanne Cartman has been the subject of jokes about her love life for 28 years now. That's a pretty long payback for a college breakup. I don't think Trey's over it. There's also the DVDA Easter egg that shows up in a couple of episodes. In the Season 2 episode Clubhouses, a teenage girl can be spotted wearing a DVDA t-shirt. DVDA is the name of Trey Parker and Matt Stone's real-life music act, and the name itself originates from their film Orgasmo, where the term gets its, let's say, creative meaning. It's an inside joke tucked into a background detail that most viewers would never notice unless they were already familiar with Parker and Stone's side projects. And if you're the kind of person who pauses episodes and reads background text, there are tons of little details like this scattered throughout the show. Posters on walls, signs in windows, graffiti on buildings. All of it is potential real estate for the animators to hide references, jokes, and personal callbacks. It's the kind of thing that rewards rewatching. You can watch an episode of South Park 5 times and catch something new on the 6th viewing. One of the things that makes South Park so unique among animated shows is how it handles celebrity guest stars. Most animated sitcoms, if they get a big name actor to come in, they give that person a cool character to voice, maybe a recurring villain or a love interest, something that shows off their talent. South Park does the opposite. The show has a long-standing tradition of casting A-list celebrities in the most demeaning, anonymous, non-speaking roles imaginable. And the celebrities agree to it because apparently being humiliated by Trey Parker and Matt Stone is considered an honor in Hollywood. The most famous example is George Clooney. Back in season 1, when the show was brand new and Clooney was already one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, he agreed to guest star on the show. His role? Voicing Stan's dog, Sparky. His entire performance consisted of barking. That's it. George Clooney, Academy Award winner, producer, director, humanitarian, bark, bark, bark. To be fair, Clooney did eventually get a small speaking role in South Park. Bigger, longer, and uncut, the 1999 movie, where he voiced a character named Dr. Gouache. So he did get an upgrade eventually. But his first contribution to the franchise was literally just dog noises. Jay Leno got a similar treatment in the season 1 finale, where he voiced Cartman's cat. His entire performance was meowing. Jay Leno, the host of The Tonight Show, one of the most recognizable voices in American television. Meow, meow, meow. And Henry Winkler, the Fonz himself, appeared in season 1 as a grunting, kid-eating monster. No words, just grunts. 3 of the biggest names in entertainment, all reduced to animal sounds and monster noises, and all 3 of them said yes. Jerry Seinfeld, on the other hand, said no. Parker and Stone offered him the role of Turkey Number 4 in the season 1 Thanksgiving episode Starvin' Marvin. Seinfeld turned it down. Now, we'll never know exactly why he said no, but the title of the role kinda says it all. Turkey Number 4, not even Turkey Number 1, the 4th most important turkey in the episode, and Seinfeld wasn't into it. Which honestly makes me wonder if he ever really understood the humor of South Park, because agreeing to be Turkey Number 4 would have been the most South Park thing a celebrity could possibly do. The show continued this tradition over the years. Radiohead voiced themselves in the season 5 episode Scott Tenorman Must Die, which is widely considered one of the greatest episodes of the entire series. It holds a 9.6 rating on IMDb, the highest rated episode in the show's history. The band plays a key role in Cartman's devastatingly dark revenge scheme against Scott Tenorman, and their cameo is a perfect example of how South Park uses real celebrities to maximum comedic effect. Korn appeared as themselves in the Season 3 Halloween Special Korn's Groovy Pirate Ghost Mystery, which was designed as a parody of Scooby-Doo. The band voiced their own characters and basically played along with the joke of being cartoon versions of themselves trapped in a mystery episode. More recently, Elon Musk, PewDiePie, and Brad Paisley have all voiced themselves on the show in later seasons. But the tradition of giving big names tiny roles still pops up from time to time, and it remains one of the most charming running gags in the franchise. Now let's talk about who actually voices the main characters, because the voice cast situation on South Park is unlike any other show in television. Trey Parker voices Stan, Cartman, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy, Timmy, Clyde, PC Principal, Satan, and dozens of other characters. Matt Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters, Gerald Broflovsky, Craig, Jimbo, Jesus, and Saddam Hussein, among many others. Between the 2 of them, Parker and Stone voiced the overwhelming majority of the entire cast. Most animated shows have a full voice cast of 10 to 20 actors. South Park basically has 2 guys doing everything, with a handful of supporting performers filling in the gaps. And those supporting performers aren't traditional voice actors either. Several of them are production staff who ended up becoming voice regulars because they happen to be in the building. Adrian Beard, who works as a production supervisor and storyboard artist, voices Tolkien Black, and has been doing so for roughly 78 episodes starting around season 4. Jennifer Howell, who is a supervising producer, voices B.B. Stevens in about 53 episodes. Vernon Chapman, a writing consultant, voices Towley in around 22 episodes. And John Hansen, a production supervisor, voices Mr. Slave in about 20 episodes. These aren't people who were hired as voice actors. They're people who worked on the show and ended up in front of the microphone because, well, somebody had to do it. Even the voices for toddler and kindergarten characters have a fun origin. Those are traditionally provided by the small children of the production staff. So when you hear a little kid on South Park, there's a good chance that's actually one of the animator's children, or an editor's kid, or somebody's toddler who happened to be hanging around the studio that week. One of the saddest chapters in the show's voice acting history involves Mary Kay Bergman, who voiced nearly all of the female characters during seasons 1 through 3. She played Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Wendy Testaberger, Mayor McDaniels, and many more. Bergman was an incredibly talented voice actress who is also well known for her work in other animated projects. On November 11th, 1999, she passed away by suicide. She was just 38 years old. After her death, her roles were initially taken over by Eliza Schneider, who voiced the female characters from 1999 through 2003. Then the roles were split between April Stewart and Mona Marshall, both of whom continue to voice South Park characters to this day. Stewart has been on the show for approximately 210 episodes and Marshall for about 226. It's a testament to the show's production team that they were able to maintain continuity through such a devastating loss, and it's something that longtime fans of the show often reflect on. The other major voice cast departure happened in 2006 when Isaac Hayes left the show. Hayes had voiced Chef, one of the most beloved characters in the series, from Season 1 through Season 9, appearing in roughly 136 to 150 episodes. He departed because of what he described as a severe ideological disagreement with the show's satirical depiction of Scientology in the Season 9 episode Trapped in the Closet. Hayes was himself a Scientologist, and he felt that the episode crossed a line. Parker and Stone responded in a pretty definitive way. In the Season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, they killed off the character, and the way they did it was both funny and kind of shocking. Because Hayes had left the show and wasn't available to record new dialogue, the production team created Chef's dialogue by splicing together recordings from his previous performances. They literally cut and pasted Isaac Hayes' voice from old episodes to create new sentences. The result sounds deliberately choppy and unnatural, which was part of the joke. And then they killed the character off in an incredibly graphic and over-the-top fashion that left absolutely no room for a return. It was South Park's way of saying goodbye. And it was exactly as graceful as you'd expect from the show. One more voice acting detail before we move on, and this one is specifically about Cartman's wardrobe. In the Season 12 episode Tonsil Trouble, Cartman accidentally contracts HIV from a blood transfusion. And from that point forward in the episode, he starts wearing a Philadelphia Phillies hat and a gray scarf. If you're a film fan, you might recognize that outfit. It's a direct reference to the wardrobe worn by Tom Hanks in the 1993 film Philadelphia, where Hanks played a man living with AIDS. Cartman's outfit matches Hanks' character's clothing almost perfectly. It's a subtle, almost loving reference to a serious film tucked into one of the show's darkest comedic episodes. And unless you've seen Philadelphia, you'd never catch it. That's the beauty of South Park's Easter eggs. They reward you for knowing random stuff about movies, music, politics, and pop culture. Now we're getting into the stuff that really makes South Park unlike any other show on television. The controversies, the bans, the episodes that networks literally pulled off the air and pretended didn't exist. South Park has been pushing buttons since the day it premiered, and some of those button pushes had real, tangible consequences. Let's start with the big one. There are 5 episodes of South Park that are consistently removed from every major streaming platform. 5 episodes that you cannot legally watch through normal channels. And all 5 of them were pulled for the same reason. They depict the Prophet Muhammad. The episodes are Super Best Friends from Season 5, Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 from Season 10, and the 2-part 200 and 201 from Season 14. Now, Super Best Friends originally aired in 2001 without any real controversy. It featured Muhammad as one of a group of religious superhero figures alongside Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and others. Muhammad was just one of the team. He had lines, he had a power, which was the ability to shoot fire. And nobody really made a fuss about it at the time. The episode aired, people watched it, and that was that. Things changed dramatically in 2006 when the Cartoon Wars 2-parter in Season 10 revisited the idea of depicting Muhammad. This time, Comedy Central got nervous and partially censored the episodes, adding black bars over certain scenes. And then in 2010, the 2-part 200 and 201 in Season 14 brought the Muhammad issue to a head. Episode 201 was supposed to be a resolution of all the threads set up in Episode 200, but it was heavily censored by Comedy Central before it ever aired. Audio bleeps were inserted over dialogue. Visual obscuring was added to hide Muhammad's image. And the entire final speech of the episode, which was actually about the importance of standing up against intimidation, was completely bleeped out. The irony of censoring a speech about not giving into censorship is something Parker and Stone have never let anyone forget. The reason for the censorship was serious, though. After episode 200 aired, the production team received credible death threats from a radical organization. These weren't vague internet comments. These were specific, targeted threats that were taken seriously enough for Comedy Central to intervene and censor episode 201 before broadcast. After that, both 200 and 201 were pulled from streaming and syndication entirely. Super Best Friends, which had been available for nearly a decade, was retroactively pulled from all platforms as well. And the Cartoon Wars episodes were removed from streaming bundles. So today, if you want to watch these 5 episodes, your options are basically limited to old DVD releases, and even some of those have been affected. The Region 4 DVD release of Season 14 has omissions related to 201. It's one of the most significant cases of censorship in American television history. And it happened not because of government intervention, but because of security concerns and network decisions. The China situation is another wild chapter. In 2019, the Season 23 episode banned in China criticized Hollywood's tendency to censor itself to appeal to the Chinese market. The episode depicted Winnie the Pooh imprisoned in a Chinese labor camp, which is significant because Winnie the Pooh had been banned in China as a caricature of President Xi Jinping. The Chinese government's response was swift and comprehensive. They enacted a blanket ban on the entire South Park franchise. Every episode was scrubbed from Chinese streaming platforms. All search terms related to South Park were blocked on Baidu, Douban, Zhihu, Bilibili, Sina Weibo, and WeChat. Discussions about the show were removed from Chinese social media. South Park was effectively erased from the Chinese internet. Parker and Stone responded with a mock apology that read in part, "We too love money more than freedom and democracy. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful." Which is again perfectly on brand for them. India also banned the show outright in 2010 through the Ministry of Broadcasting, citing extreme vulgarity. South Park remained completely unavailable in India for nearly a decade until Netflix India acquired streaming rights in 2019 and made it available with an 18+ rating. And South Park is wholly banned in several other countries around the world as well, though the specific list of countries has shifted over the years. The show's relationship with religious groups has been contentious from the start. The Season 9 episode Bloody Mary depicted a statue of the Virgin Mary that appeared to be menstruating upon Pope Benedict XVI. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights launched a major campaign to have the episode permanently removed from the airwaves. They were unsuccessful, but the controversy generated significant media coverage and put South Park back in the national conversation about the limits of satire. Then there's the Scientology episode Trapped in the Closet, also from Season 9. This is the one that caused Isaac Hayes to leave the show, as we talked about earlier. But the fallout went beyond just Hayes. There were reports that Comedy Central pulled a planned rerun of the episode after pressure from Tom Cruise, though this was never officially confirmed by the network. The episode is a pretty brutal takedown of Scientology's beliefs, laid out in a straightforward, almost educational way, with a running disclaimer at the bottom of the screen that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." It remains one of the most talked about episodes in the show's history. Let's lighten things up a little and talk about some of the show's record-breaking moments, because South Park has broken quite a few records over the years. The Season 5 episode It Hits the Fan is famous for using the uncensored word shit 162 times in a single episode. The show kept a running counter on screen, which was both a joke about how often the word was being used and a commentary on how broadcast standards had been loosening over time. 162 times in 22 minutes. That's roughly once every 8 seconds. The 1999 theatrical film South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut took the profanity even further. It entered the 2001 Guinness Book of World Records for most swearing in an animated film. The movie also received an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song for Blame Canada, a satirical number about Canadian culture that was written by Trey Parker and Mark Shaman. Getting nominated for an Oscar for a song from a movie that holds the Guinness record for animated profanity is exactly the kind of contradiction that defines South Park's place in American culture. Speaking of the Oscars, when Parker and Stone attended the 2000 ceremony for the Blame Canada nomination, they showed up wearing dresses. Parker wore a green gown that was similar to one Jennifer Lopez had famously worn, and Stone wore a pink dress. They later admitted in interviews that they were under the influence of certain substances during the ceremony. It was one of the most memorable red carpet moments of that era, and it perfectly captured the spirit of two guys who refused to take Hollywood seriously, even when Hollywood was literally honoring their work. One more controversy that's worth mentioning is the video game situation. South Park, The Stick of Truth, the critically acclaimed RPG that released in 2014, was initially banned in Australia. The reason was that the game included interactive alien anal probing sequences and an abortion minigame, which Australian censors determined crossed the line. A censored version of the game was eventually released for the Australian, European, and Israeli markets, with the offending content replaced by screens describing what the player was missing. The censorship screens themselves became a meme because they were written in such a deliberately over-the-top way that they were arguably funnier than the content they were replacing. Season 21 holds the distinction of having the lowest Rotten Tomatoes critics score in the show's history at just 54%. And during the DVD commentary for Season 3, Parker and Stone themselves admitted that they were extremely dissatisfied with the majority of Season 2. So even the creators have their opinions about which seasons worked and which ones didn't. And here's one more movie fact that rounds out the financial picture. The 1999 film Bigger, Longer, and Uncut had a production budget of $21 million and grossed approximately $83.1 million worldwide. It premiered on June 23, 1999, with a wide release on June 30th. For an R-rated animated musical comedy about foul-mouthed kids starting a war between the United States and Canada, those are seriously impressive numbers. The movie proved that there was a massive audience for South Park beyond the television screen, and it helped establish the franchise as a cultural phenomenon that extended well beyond Comedy Central's programming schedule. All right, let's shift into something a little more cozy, character lore. Because one of the things that makes South Park so rewatchable, even after 28 seasons, is how much depth the characters have developed over time. Some of the most interesting details about these characters aren't things you'd catch on a first viewing. They're buried in continuity, in background details, in throwaway lines that turned out to be way more significant than anyone expected. Let's start with Butters Stotch, because his journey from background nobody to one of the most important characters on the show is honestly one of my favorite stories in all of television. Butters first appeared as a completely unnamed background character in the pilot episode. He was just a kid standing around, no lines, no name, nothing. He gradually started getting a little more screen time around Season 3, picking up a name and some basic personality traits. But his big break came in Season 5 when Kenny was permanently killed off in the episode Kenny Dies. With one of the 4 main boys gone, the show needed someone to fill the gap. Butters, along with Tweak, stepped into that role for most of Season 6, effectively replacing Kenny as the 4th member of the group. And here's the thing about Butters that a lot of people don't know. The character is based on a real person. Specifically, he's based on South Park co-producer Eric Staff, whose nickname is Butters. Staff has been with the show since the beginning and directed 15 episodes between 1998 and 2002. So every time you see Butters on screen doing something naive or getting punished by his parents for something that isn't his fault, there's a real person on the production team who that character is modeled after. I have to imagine that makes staff meetings interesting. Now let's talk about Kenny's death in more detail because the timeline is actually really specific and fascinating. Kenny was killed in nearly every episode during seasons 1 through 5. It was the show's most famous running gag. The manner of death changed every time, from getting crushed by a school cafeteria to being set on fire to being eaten by various animals. But the punchline was always the same. Kenny dies, the boys react, and everything resets by the next episode. Then in Season 5, Episode 13, which aired on December 5th, 2001, the show did something nobody expected. They killed Kenny off for real, not as a gag, for real. The episode was literally called Kenny Dies, and in it, Kenny is diagnosed with a terminal illness and actually passes away in a way that the show treats with genuine emotional weight. It was a shocking departure from the running joke, and it felt like a real ending, and for a while it was. Kenny stayed dead through all of Season 6. He didn't appear. He didn't come back. Butters and Tweak took his place. The show was actually operating without one of its 4 original main characters for an entire season. Kenny returned at the end of Season 6, and the running death gag resumed. But for years, his ability to come back from the dead was never explained within the show's actual lore. It was just a thing that happened. Dead one episode, alive the next, no questions asked. That changed in Season 14, when the show finally revealed the actual in-universe mechanism behind Kenny's resurrections. I won't spoil how it works for anyone who hasn't seen it, but the explanation ties into some of the show's deeper mythology in a way that is both genuinely clever and completely ridiculous. It's the kind of thing South Park does really well, taking a running gag that existed purely for laughs and retroactively giving it a canonical explanation that actually makes sense within the world of the show. Kyle Broflovsky had his own near-death experience behind the scenes, though this one was about the writer's room rather than the plot. At the end of Season 5, Parker and Stone seriously considered killing Kyle off permanently, the same way they did with Kenny. They were thinking about making it a 2-for-1 departure, losing both Kenny and Kyle in the same season. Obviously, that didn't happen, and Kyle has remained one of the 4 central characters for the entire run of the show. But it's wild to think about how different South Park would be today if Parker and Stone had gone through with it. No Kyle means no Kyle and Cartman dynamic, which is arguably the most important relationship in the entire series. Speaking of characters whose significance changed over time, let's talk about Token Black. For the majority of the show's run, this character was known as Token Black, and his name was treated as a meta joke about him being the only black kid in the group. But in the Season 25 episode The Big Fix, the show revealed that his name had actually been Tolkien the entire time, named after J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. Stan, who had been misspelling his friend's name as Token for years, has to confront the fact that he just assumed the black kid's name was a racial joke. It's a really smart bit of writing that turns one of the show's most problematic recurring gags into commentary about casual racism and assumptions. And since that episode, the character has been referred to as Tolkien both on the show and in all official materials. Randy Marsh is another character whose role in the show has shifted dramatically over the years. In the early seasons, Randy was just Stan's dad, a minor character who showed up when the plot needed a parent to do something dumb. But over time, the writers kept giving him bigger and bigger stories, and eventually Randy became such a central figure that many fans and critics consider him the main character of the modern era of South Park. This shift really solidified starting with Season 23 and the introduction of Tegrity Farms, Randy's marijuana farm that became the driving force behind multiple seasons of storylines. The idea that a background dad character could gradually evolve into the show's lead protagonist over the course of 20-plus seasons is pretty unusual for any television show. And it speaks to how organically South Park has allowed its characters to develop. PC Principal has a similar story, though his arc was much faster. He was introduced in the Season 19 premiere Stunning and Brave as a one-off villain, an aggressive, politically correct college bro who takes over as the school principal. He was only supposed to appear in that one episode, but the character worked so well that the writers promoted him to a permanent main cast member by the end of the season. Now he's been a fixture of the show for years. It's one of those happy accidents of television writing where a character just clicks with the audience and the creative team in a way that nobody anticipated. Wendy Testaberger, on the other hand, experienced the opposite trajectory. She was a prominent character in the early seasons, serving as Stan's love interest and occasional voice of reason. But starting around season 5, she essentially vanished from the show. Across all of seasons 5 and 6, she had only a single minor appearance. Just one. For 2 entire seasons, one of the original female leads was basically written out of the show. She didn't regain any real prominence until the end of season 11. It's never been fully explained why Wendy was sidelined for so long, but it's one of those mysteries of television production that fans have speculated about for years. Satan's story on South Park is another interesting case of character evolution. For most of the show's run, Satan was a recurring character who popped up in various episodes, usually as a somewhat sympathetic figure despite being, the literal devil. He was in an abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein. He threw a Halloween party. He was involved in some of the show's biggest storylines. But in season 22, Satan was killed by Man-Bear Pig. And unlike most South Park deaths, this one was permanent. The character hasn't returned since. So South Park did something that very few shows ever do. It killed Satan permanently and just moved on. The show's impact on politics and culture has even produced its own terminology. The phrase South Park Republican was coined to describe viewers who aligned with the creator's generally libertarian political viewpoints. Parker and Stone are fiscally conservative but socially liberal, skeptical of both major political parties, and deeply suspicious of anyone who takes themselves too seriously. The term South Park Republican became a genuine phrase used in political commentary and analysis, which is pretty remarkable for a show that features talking poop as a recurring character. And before we leave the character section, let's acknowledge one more thing about Scott Tenorman Must Die, the highest rated episode on IMDb at 9.6 out of 10. This is the episode that fundamentally redefined Eric Cartman as a character. Before Scott Tenorman, Cartman was a bully, a brat, and a general nuisance. After Scott Tenorman, he was something else entirely. The episode revealed a capacity for cruelty and manipulation in Cartman that went far beyond anything the show had done before, and it permanently changed how both the characters and the audience perceived him. It's widely considered not just the best episode of South Park, but one of the best episodes of any animated series ever made. And it's the episode that made Cartman one of the most iconic villains in television history, even though he's technically one of the main characters. All right, let's talk about the South Park Extended Universe. Because the franchise goes way beyond just the TV show. There are movies, video games, streaming specials, and even real-world merchandise that blur the line between fiction and reality. And some of the stories behind these projects are just as interesting as the show itself. Let's start with the video games, because the history of South Park games is honestly kind of a roller coaster. The first official South Park video game came out in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, PC, and PlayStation. It was a first-person shooter published by Acclaim, and it was not great. It was a South Park game, so fans bought it, but it was pretty rough around the edges. Acclaim followed it up with South Park Chef's Love Shack in 1999, which was a trivia and party game for Dreamcast, PlayStation, N64, and PC. And then in 2000, they released South Park Rally, a racing game. None of these were particularly well received. They were the kind of licensed games that existed primarily to cash in on the show's popularity rather than to deliver a genuinely good gaming experience. But here's where it gets interesting. There was actually a South Park Game Boy Color game in development back in 1998 that was canceled before it could be released. And the reason it was canceled is really telling. Parker and Stone looked at the project and decided that making a game based on an adult animated series for a handheld console that was primarily used by children was inappropriate. They shut it down, which is a surprisingly responsible move from two guys who made a living off of pushing every boundary imaginable. The unfinished game eventually leaked online in 2014, so you can actually find it and play it if you're curious, but it was never officially released. There was also an unreleased GTA-style South Park game that was developed by a studio called Buzz Monkey Software. An open-world South Park game in the style of Grand Theft Auto could have been amazing, but it never made it to release. Nobody outside of the production team has ever really explained why it was shelved, and it remains one of the biggest what-ifs in South Park gaming history. After a string of mediocre games from Acclaim and others, it took over a decade for someone to get a South Park game right. That finally happened on March 4th, 2014, when South Park: The Stick of Truth was released for Xbox 360, PS3, and Windows. It was developed by Obsidian Entertainment, the studio behind Fallout, New Vegas, and it was the first South Park game that was widely considered to be genuinely great. The game was a full-blown RPG with combat, exploration, and a story that felt like a long episode of the show. Parker and Stone were heavily involved in the writing, and it showed. The humor was authentic, the gameplay was solid, and for the first time, a South Park game delivered an experience that was worthy of the show it was based on. The Stick of Truth was followed by South Park: The Fractured But Whole, which released on October 17, 2017 for PC, PS4, and Xbox One. This was also an RPG, this time with a superhero theme that played off the Coon and Friends storylines from the TV series. And the most recent game, South Park: Snow Day, came out on March 26, 2024 for PC, Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. Snow Day went in a different direction, offering a 3D cooperative gameplay experience rather than the RPG format of the previous two games. Reviews were mixed, but it was packed with Easter eggs and references to the show that dedicated fans appreciated. Beyond the games, South Park expanded into movies and streaming specials in a way that kept the franchise feeling fresh. The 1999 theatrical film, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, is obviously the biggest of these. We've already talked about its box office performance and its Guinness record and its Oscar nomination, but it's worth noting that the film is also a full-blown musical. Parker and Stone wrote all the songs, and the music is genuinely excellent. Blame Canada is the one that got the Oscar nomination, but the entire soundtrack is packed with sharp, funny, well-composed musical numbers. Parker, remember, was a music major in college. The man can write a song. And the movie gave him the platform to do it on a level that the weekly TV show couldn't really accommodate. In 2008, the Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 was compiled into a direct-to-video director's cut called Imagination Land, the movie. It included unseen footage that wasn't in the original broadcast episodes, and it went on to win the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in the 1 hour or more category. The Imagination Land episodes are some of the most ambitious in the show's history, featuring a massive war inside the realm of human imagination that brings together characters from every fictional property you can think of. And the director's cut tied them together into something that genuinely felt like a movie. Starting in 2021, South Park began producing long-form specials exclusively for Paramount+. Between 2021 and 2024, 7 of these specials were released. Post-COVID and post-COVID, the return of COVID both came out in late 2021, showing the boys as adults in a timeline set decades after the events of the main series. The Streaming Wars. Part 1 and Part 2 followed in 2022, satirizing the water crisis and streaming wars simultaneously. Joining the Pandaverse came out in October 2023 and took aim at Disney's diversity casting controversies. Not Suitable for Children followed in December 2023. And The End of Obesity was released on May 24, 2024, tackling the weight loss drug phenomenon. Each of these specials runs about 45 minutes, which gives the creative team more room to develop stories than the standard 22-minute format allows. And here's one of my favorite facts about South Park's awards history. The show has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program. The winning episodes were Best Friends Forever in 2005, Make Love, Not Warcraft in 2007, The Imagination Land movie in 2008, Margaritaville in 2009, and Raising the Bar in 2013. 5 Emmys is an impressive haul for any animated series, and it puts South Park in pretty elite company. But the award that I think says the most about South Park's legacy is the Peabody Award that the show received in 2005 or 2006. The Peabody Award is one of the most prestigious honors in broadcasting, given to programs that demonstrate distinguished and biting social commentary. It's the kind of award that typically goes to serious documentaries, investigative journalism, and prestige dramas. And they gave it to South Park, a show about 4 foul-mouthed kids in Colorado, a show that features a talking piece of Christmas poop as a recurring character, a show that held the Guinness record for animated profanity. That show won a Peabody, and honestly, it deserved it. Because underneath all the toilet humor and shock value, South Park has consistently delivered some of the smartest, most relevant social commentary on television. The Make Love, Not Warcraft episode deserves a special mention because of how it was made. The Season 10 episode was filmed extensively using machinima techniques within the actual World of Warcraft game engine. The production team worked directly with Blizzard Entertainment to capture footage inside the game, and the result was an episode that looked and felt completely different from any other South Park episode before or after it. It also won an Emmy, which makes it one of the most critically acclaimed machinima productions ever created. Season 8 gave us Good Times with Weapons, which featured extensive segments animated in a stylized Japanese anime format. The boys buy ninja weapons at a flea market, and their imaginations transform the episode into a full-blown anime action sequence, complete with dramatic poses, speed lines, and over-the-top fight choreography. It was a complete visual departure from the normal South Park style, and it demonstrated how flexible the show's animation pipeline had become. In Season 12's Major Boobage used heavy rotoscoping to emulate the visual style of the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal. The psychedelic sequences in that episode look nothing like South Park. They look like something out of a prog rock album cover from the 1970s. It's one of the most visually adventurous episodes in the show's history, and it showed that the production team was willing to completely reinvent the show's look when the story called for it. Before we move on to the final stretch, let me hit you with a couple of merchandise facts that I find kind of amazing. By the year 2000, just 3 years after the show premiered, franchise retail sales had already exceeded $250 million. $250 million in 3 years. And Season 1 character t-shirts alone generated $30 million in sales, making them the top-selling specialty shirts in the entire United States at the time. In 2011, Comedy Central partnered with Frito-Lay to sell 1.5 million bags of Cartman's Cheesy Poofs at Walmart. Cheesy Poofs, the fictional snack from the show. They made them real. You could go to a Walmart and buy a bag of Cheesy Poofs off the shelf. The line between the fictional world of South Park and the real world has always been blurry, and turning a fake snack into a real product that sold 1.5 million bags is probably the best example of that. All right, we're in the home stretch now, the last 10 facts, and then I'll let you drift off. But these final ones are some of my favorites, so stick with me if you're still awake. As of the season 28 finale, which aired on December 10th, 2025, South Park has produced 338 episodes across 28 seasons. That total includes the 7 Paramount Plus specials, 338 episodes, and the show is still going. It's been renewed through at least 2029 or 2030, which means it's going to comfortably pass the 350 episode mark and potentially reach 400 before all is said and done. For an animated show that started as a construction paper Christmas card, that's a pretty incredible run. We already talked about how the show's rapid production cycle allows it to respond to current events faster than any other animated series. But I want to highlight a couple more examples of this because they really drive the point home. The Season 9 episode, Best Friends Forever, the one about the Terry Schiavo case, aired less than 12 hours before she actually passed away. The episode commentary on end-of-life decisions was hitting television screens while the real-world story was still unfolding. And that episode went on to win the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. So they weren't just fast, they were fast and good. The Season 7 finale, It's Christmas in Canada, included a joke about Saddam Hussein being found in a spider hole, referencing his capture by American forces. That capture happened on December 13th, 2003. The episode aired on December 17th. 4 days. 4 days to write a joke, animate it, record the voice acting, edit it, and get it on the air. Standard animated shows are still working on episodes that won't air for another 8 months. South Park was making jokes about something that happened last weekend. Now here's an Easter egg that's hidden in the architecture of the show itself. In the Season 11 episode D-Yikes, Mrs. Garrison visits a lesbian bar called Les Boss, which is pronounced in the French style. The bar has a street address of 13280. If you type that number on a handheld calculator and flip it upside down, it reads Lezbo. It's the kind of joke that you'd only catch if you were really paying attention and happened to have a calculator nearby. Or if someone on the internet pointed it out, which is how most people discover it. The production company credit sequence from the first 2 seasons had its own little Easter egg as well. The production company Braniff featured a jaunty 12-note tune played on a xylophone over the closing graphic of each episode. It was a subtle, consistent audio detail that ran for 2 full seasons before the closing credits were updated. If you go back and watch early episodes, you can hear it at the very end after the credits roll. It's one of those little touches that adds character to a show without most viewers ever noticing it's there. The Season 4 episode, A Very Crappy Christmas, is a love letter to South Park's own origin story. In the episode, the boys decide to make a Christmas card to raise the spirits of the townspeople during a bleak holiday season. They create the card using the exact same animation method that Parker and Stone used to make the original Spirit of Christmas shorts. Construction paper, stop motion, the whole thing. And the episode goes even further than that. Some of the dialogue from the original Jesus vs. Santa short is reused verbatim in the episode, and actual clips from the 1995 short are included. It's a meta callback to the show's own creation, and it's one of the most self-aware episodes in the entire series. Season 12's Major Boobage, which we touched on earlier, used heavy rotoscoping to emulate the visual style of the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal. But what makes this worth revisiting is how dramatically different the episode looks from everything else South Park has ever done. The psychedelic sequences are lush, colorful, and completely unhinged. They look like they belong in a completely different show. And the fact that the production team was able to pull off that kind of visual departure within their 6-day production window is genuinely impressive. South Park is wholly banned in several countries around the world. We talked about China and India specifically, but the list extends beyond those two. The exact count of banned countries has shifted over the years as different episodes trigger different responses from different governments. But the bottom line is that South Park has been deemed too offensive for broadcast in multiple nations. And honestly, Parker and Stone probably consider that a point of pride. And that brings us to the final fact. Number 100. South Park premiered on August 13th, 1997. As of 2025, it has been on the air for 28 years. 28 years of construction paper animation, rapid-fire production cycles, hidden aliens, muffled profanity, banned episodes, cultural controversies, Peabody Awards, Emmy wins, Oscar nominations, billion-dollar deals, and characters named after ex-girlfriends. It is one of the longest-running animated series in American television history, and with the show renewed through at least 2029 or 2030, it shows absolutely no signs of stopping. The show has outlasted the presidency of 5 different presidents. It premiered when Bill Clinton was in office. It was still airing when George W. Bush was elected. It was still airing when Barack Obama was elected. It was still airing when Donald Trump was elected. It was still airing when Joe Biden was elected. And it's still airing now. South Park has been on the air for so long that kids who grew up watching the first season are now the same age as Randy Marsh. The show has literally outlived some of its own audience's childhoods, their college years, their careers, and their marriages. And it's still going. And the craziest part is that it all started with 2 guys in Colorado, a pair of scissors, some construction paper, and a really old camera. That's it. That's the entire foundation of one of the biggest cultural phenomena in television history. 2 friends who made each other laugh in film class, created a Christmas card that went viral before the internet even worked the way it does now, and somehow turned that into a show that changed television forever. So that's 100 South Park Easter eggs and facts. If you made it all the way through, I'm genuinely impressed. And if you fell asleep somewhere around fact 47, that's totally fine too. That was kind of the point. Either way, thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing if you haven't already. We do stuff like this all the time. Longer videos you can fall asleep to. Stuff that's interesting enough to listen to, but calm enough that you won't be up all night. Hit that like button if you want to see more of these, and I'll catch you in the next one. Sleep well. Actually, you know what? Before we wrap up, I feel like there's a lot more ground we can cover. We hit the 100 facts, but some of those topics deserve a deeper dive. And since this is a sleep video and we're not in any rush, let's settle back in and explore some of these stories a little more. Let's go back to the voice acting for a second, because there's something about Kenny's character that we didn't fully explore. We talked about how Kenny's lines are fully scripted despite being muffled. But what we didn't get into is how the muffling actually works from a performance perspective. When Trey Parker voices Kenny, he literally puts his hand over his mouth or cups his hands around his face to create that muffled sound. It's not done in post-production. It's not a filter. The man physically obstructs his own voice while recording. And despite that, he delivers every line with full intent and emotion. There are moments in the show where Kenny says something heartfelt or important. And even through the muffling, you can hear the emotional weight behind it. That's not easy to do. It takes a specific kind of vocal performance to convey meaning through a barrier like that. And Parker has been doing it for nearly 3 decades. And while we're on the subject of voice performances, here's something interesting about how the boys' voices are created. In the very early production of South Park, before it was even a TV show, Parker and Stone figured out how to do the children's voices during camera tests at the University of Colorado. They would make impressions of children's voices while running equipment checks, and those voice tests eventually became the foundation for how Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny sound. So the voices you hear on the show today are essentially refined versions of goofing around voices that 2 college students came up with while testing cameras. There was no formal voice direction, no casting process, just 2 guys making silly voices to amuse each other, and those silly voices became some of the most recognizable character voices in animation history. The evolution of the theme song is worth spending a little more time on too, because there are some details we skimmed past earlier that are genuinely fascinating. When Comedy Central started airing reruns of seasons 1 through 9 in syndication starting from August 2nd, 2005, they didn't use the original theme song. They used the bluegrass version, even for episodes that originally aired with the classic Primus arrangement. And they added a cash register sound right before Claypool starts singing. The visuals for these rerun versions resembled the first 4 seasons, but included more recent characters, creating this weird hybrid opening that existed only in syndication. If you watched South Park reruns on Comedy Central in the mid-2000s, you saw a version of the show's intro that was different from both the original broadcast version and the current version. It's a piece of South Park history that's easy to forget about because it existed in this transitional window between the show's early era and its modern era. There's also a goth kids version of the theme song that not many people know about. In certain episodes, the standard theme has been replaced with an alternate version sung by the goth kids, with completely different lyrics. The goth version replaces "Friendly faces everywhere, humble folks without temptation," with "death and sadness everywhere, loneliness and degradation." Cartman's line about ample parking becomes Pete's line about nightmares every night, posers spouting "let's go shopping." And Kenny's spot is taken by Ferkel, who sings "I like spiders, loss and rain, I'm only happy when I'm in pain." It's a perfect inversion of the normal theme, and it captures the goth kids' worldview perfectly. The theme song was actually available as downloadable content for the game Rocksmith 2014, which is another random crossover between South Park and gaming that not a lot of people know about. And here's a weird continuity issue with the current version of the intro. The opening sequence hasn't been significantly updated since Season 17, which means characters like Principal Victoria and Mr. Hanky still appear in the intro even though they've stopped appearing on the actual show. Meanwhile, major characters who were added after Season 17, like PC Principal, who replaced Principal Victoria, don't appear in the intro at all. So the intro is essentially frozen in a version of South Park that no longer exists on the show itself. Let me circle back to the production side for a minute because there are some additional details about the 6-day production cycle that I think are worth highlighting. When Parker and Stone say they start from scratch every Thursday, they really mean from scratch. The writers don't have scripts stockpiled. They don't have episodes in various stages of completion waiting to be finished. Each Wednesday night, after an episode has been transmitted to Comedy Central, the production team basically resets to zero. Thursday morning, they're staring at a blank page. And by the following Wednesday, they need to have a fully animated, fully voiced, fully edited, fully scored episode ready for broadcast every single week. For the duration of the season, the way this actually plays out in practice is that Parker usually comes up with a central idea for the episode early in the week, often during Thursday or Friday brainstorming sessions. He then writes the script, sometimes pulling all-nighters to get it done by Saturday or Sunday. The script gets handed off to the animation team, who begin building the episode in Maya. Voice recording happens concurrently, often with Parker and Stone recording their lines in a booth at the studio, while animators are working on scenes from earlier in the episode in the next room. The editing, sound mixing, and final color correction all happen in the last day or two of the cycle, and the episode is literally being finalized while the satellite uplink window is approaching. One of the things that makes this possible is the visual simplicity of the show's animation style. Because South Park is designed to look like paper cutouts, the characters don't require complex facial animations, detailed lighting setups, or sophisticated rendering passes. The simplicity is strategic. It allows the production team to animate fast without sacrificing the show's visual identity. If South Park looked like Pixar, the 6-day cycle would be physically impossible. But because it looks like construction paper, a team of 70 people can pull it off week after week. The documentary 6 Days to Air gives you a really visceral sense of how stressful this process is. There's a moment in the documentary where it's Wednesday afternoon, the episode is supposed to air that night, and the final scenes are still being animated. Parker's in the editing bay making cuts while the animators are still rendering. The clock is running out. And somehow they get it done. They always get it done. Except for that one time in season 27 when they didn't, which led to that public apology we talked about earlier. Now let me spend some more time on the Easter eggs because we covered the big ones, but there are a ton of smaller details that are worth knowing about. The show has a tradition of hiding references to Parker and Stone's other work throughout the series. We talked about the DVD-A shirt in Season 2, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. References to Cannibal, the musical, Orgasmo, Basketball, and Team America, World Police pop up throughout the show's run. In the Imagination Land episodes, there's a subtle reference to Team America's score slipped into a scene about terrorism. Parker and Stone have said that making Team America almost destroyed their friendship because of how brutal the production was, which might be why the show doesn't reference it as often as their other projects. The A113 Easter egg is another fun one. In the episode Prehistoric Iceman, the code A113 is clearly visible on the side of a helicopter. A 113 is a famous Easter egg in animation that refers to a classroom at the California Institute of the Arts where many famous animators studied. It pops up in Pixar movies, Disney films, and dozens of other animated properties. Seeing it in South Park is a fun little nod to the wider animation community. There's also an episode where one of the boys is on a computer in a chat room, and if you pause the screen and read the text, the messages are incredibly inappropriate. This is in the episode Cartman Joins Nambla, and the screen text moves by so fast during normal playback that you'd never catch it. But if you have the DVD and play it in slow motion, the full text is readable, and it's exactly as dark as you'd expect from South Park. The alphabet displayed above the chalkboard in the school has been a source of Easter egg hunting for years. In certain episodes, if you look carefully, the letters above the board contain hidden messages or are arranged in unusual ways. It's one of those background details that the animators seem to change from episode to episode, rewarding viewers who pay attention to the set decoration. Let me talk a little more about the show's approach to continuity, because it's changed significantly over the years, and that shift is itself a kind of Easter egg for long-time viewers. For the majority of its run, South Park was an almost entirely episodic show. Each episode was self-contained. What happened in one episode had no bearing on the next. Characters who died came back without explanation. Dramatic events were forgotten by the following week. The only real continuity was the setting and the characters themselves. That started to change around season 18, when the show began incorporating serialized storylines that carried over across multiple episodes. This was a big shift for a show that had been proudly episodic for 17 seasons. Season 20 took serialization even further, featuring a single continuous 10-episode arc about internet trolling and the 2016 presidential election, told through the metaphor of Cartman's relationship with Heidi Turner and Mr. Garrison's transformation into a Trump-like figure. The reception to season 20's heavy serialization was mixed, and subsequent seasons dialed back the strict serial continuity. But the show never fully returned to its purely episodic roots. Modern South Park exists in a hybrid space where individual episodes tell self-contained stories, but loose character arcs and plot threads carry over across the season. The Tegrity Farms era, starting in season 23, is the clearest example of this hybrid approach. Randy's marijuana farm became a persistent element of the show that influenced multiple episodes, but each individual episode could still be watched and understood on its own. It's a balance that the show has been experimenting with for years, and it's resulted in a version of South Park that feels both familiar and different from its earlier seasons. The show's treatment of real-world events is worth spending another moment on, because the speed at which South Park responds to the news has produced some genuinely remarkable pieces of television. Beyond the Tereshkiavo and Saddam Hussein examples we already discussed, there are dozens of other cases where the show turned around topical commentary in a matter of days. The 2008 presidential election between Barack Obama and John McCain was covered in near real time. The Elian Gonzalez affair, the 2000 presidential election, the BP oil spill, the rise of social media, the legalization of marijuana, the COVID pandemic, every major cultural moment of the last 3 decades has been filtered through South Park's writer's room within days of it happening. This is possible because of the 6-day production cycle, but it also requires a creative team that is deeply engaged with current events and capable of finding the satirical angle in any story almost immediately. Parker has described the process as operating on pure adrenaline and anxiety. There's no time for second guessing. You come up with an idea, you commit to it, and you execute it before you have a chance to talk yourself out of it. That urgency gives the show an energy and a rawness that you simply cannot replicate with a longer production schedule. Let's dive a little deeper into some of the show's most format-breaking episodes, because these are some of the most creative things South Park has ever done. We talked about Make Love, Not Warcraft, Good Times with Weapons, and Major Boobage. But there are several other episodes that completely reinvented the show's format in surprising ways. Woodland Critter Christmas from Season 8 is narrated entirely in a fairy tale style, as if someone is reading a children's storybook. The episode features adorable woodland animals who turn out to be satanic cult members trying to bring about the birth of the Antichrist. The contrast between the cozy narration style and the horrific content is what makes the episode so memorable. It feels like a bedtime story gone horribly wrong, which, since you might be falling asleep right now, seems appropriate to mention. A Million Little Fibers from Season 10 is a mostly standalone episode focused entirely on Towley and the character Fiber, barely featuring the main boys at all. It's one of the lowest rated episodes on IMDb, hovering around a 6.4, but it's also one of the weirdest and most experimental episodes in the show's history. The fact that Parker and Stone devoted an entire episode to a sentient towel trying to get his memoir published says a lot about how willing they are to take creative risks, even when those risks don't always pay off. And Season 8's Awesome O episode, where Cartman disguises himself as a robot to spy on Butters, features a scene where the robot is asked to pitch movie ideas to a Hollywood studio. The pitches are all deliberately terrible, and the studio executives love every single one of them. It's a savage commentary on the Hollywood development process that feels even more relevant today than it did when it aired. South Park's cultural footprint extends into areas you might not expect, too. The show popularized several phrases and concepts that entered mainstream usage. The phrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and its response, "You bastards," became one of the earliest internet-era catchphrases. Cartman's "Respect my authorita" became a cultural shorthand for petty power trips. "Screw you guys, I'm going home" became a universal way to express doneness with a situation. The concept of man-bear-pig, which started as a satirical take on Al Gore's climate change activism, evolved over multiple seasons into a more nuanced commentary on how society ignores real threats. Tegrity Farms became a cultural reference point for the marijuana industry. And the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day movement in 2010 was partially inspired by the show's censorship controversy surrounding episodes 200 and 201. The show has even been referenced in academic literature. There's an entire book called South Park and Philosophy that examines the show's themes through the lens of ethical and political philosophy. South Park has been cited in academic papers about satire, censorship, media studies, and political communication. External references to the show have appeared in comic strips like Big Nate, Foxtrot, and Get Fuzzy, as well as in Mad Magazine. It's become one of those cultural touchstones that people reference even if they've never watched a full episode. Now, if you're still with me, I want to talk about one more thing before we really wrap this up, and it's about the show's relationship with its fans. South Park has always existed in this interesting space between the creators and the audience. Parker and Stone have never been particularly interested in fan service. They've never done reunion specials or feel-good retrospectives. They've never softened the show's edges to appeal to a wider audience. If anything, they've gone in the opposite direction, consistently pushing harder and further with each passing season. But at the same time, the show clearly rewards its most dedicated viewers. The hidden aliens, the recurring character callbacks, the continuity nods that span decades of episodes, the references to their own student films, all of these things are gifts to the people who pay attention. South Park is a show that you can enjoy casually, catching an episode here and there and still have a great time, but it's also a show that reveals layer after layer of detail if you commit to watching it closely. The more you know about the show's history, the funnier and more impressive it becomes. The official South Park Studios website, which is accessible at southparkstudios.com and southpark.cc.com, offers free full episode streaming. So if anything we've talked about tonight made you want to go back and rewatch a specific episode or check out something you've never seen before, you can do that without paying anything. The entire show's out there waiting for you. Well, except for those 5 banned episodes, those you'll have to track down on your own. So that really is everything. 100 facts and then some. The full story of South Park, from construction paper in a Colorado university to a $1.5 billion deal with Paramount. From 2 friends making each other laugh in film class to 338 episodes of the sharpest satire on television. From hidden aliens in the background to an Oscar-nominated song about blaming Canada. From Kenny dying every week to the entire franchise being banned from China. It's been quite a ride. And if you fell asleep somewhere in the middle, that's perfect. That's what this video was for. But if you're still here, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. Now go to sleep. Good night. Actually, wait. I keep saying good night and then thinking of more stuff I want to tell you about. You know what? Let's just keep going. If you're asleep, this is background noise. If you're awake, you're getting bonus content. Win-win. Let me tell you more about the individual episodes that have become landmarks in the show's history, because some of these stories are genuinely incredible when you dig into the details. Scott Tenorman Must Die from Season 5 is the episode that holds that 9.6 IMDb rating we talked about, and it deserves a deeper look at why it's considered so important. The episode centers on Cartman being humiliated by an older kid named Scott Tenorman, who tricks him into buying his pubic hair for $16.12. Cartman spends the entire episode trying to get his money back and being repeatedly outsmarted. It seems like a typical Cartman loses story for most of its runtime. But in the final minutes, the episode reveals that Cartman has been orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme that involves getting Scott's parents killed, having them ground into chili, and then feeding that chili to Scott at a public event. The twist is so dark and so unexpected that it fundamentally redefined Cartman's character. Before this episode, he was an annoying bully. After this episode, he was capable of genuine evil. And the show never looked back. Every terrible thing Cartman has done since then exists in the shadow of Scott Tenorman Must Die. The episode also features Radiohead, who Cartman arranged to show up specifically so they could mock Scott Tenorman for being a crybaby while he's eating the chili. The band agreed to voice themselves for this scene, which means Radiohead, one of the most critically acclaimed rock bands in the world, played themselves participating in a scheme that involves feeding a teenager his own parents. That's the kind of creative collaboration that only South Park could pull off. Make Love, Not Warcraft from Season 10 has its own fascinating production story. The episode required the South Park team to work directly with Blizzard Entertainment, the company behind World of Warcraft, to capture footage inside the actual game. Blizzard gave the team access to private servers where they could control the characters and environments without interference from other players. The machinima sequences were then composited with the show's traditional animation to create the final product. The episode tells the story of the boys becoming obsessed with World of Warcraft and battling an overpowered player who's been killing everyone in the game. It perfectly captured the culture of online gaming in a way that resonated with both gamers and non-gamers alike. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program and is consistently ranked as one of the 10 best episodes in the show's history. Margaritaville from Season 13 aired in 2009, right in the thick of the financial crisis, and it's a masterclass in economic satire. The episode compares the American public's reaction to the recession to religious faith, with Randy Marsh leading the town in a movement of extreme frugality while Stan tries to figure out how the economy actually works. Stan ends up at the Treasury Department, where he discovers that economic policy decisions are made by a group of officials who cut the head off a chicken and let it run around a board of possible policy responses. Wherever the chicken falls dead, that's the policy they go with. The episode won the Emmy and was praised for making complex economic concepts accessible through absurd comedy. The Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 is arguably the most ambitious storyline South Park ever attempted within the framework of the regular series. It's a 3-part epic about terrorists attacking the realm of human imagination, where every fictional character ever conceived exists. The scope of the story is enormous. Characters from Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Narnia, and dozens of other franchises appear alongside original South Park characters in a massive battle for the future of human creativity. There's a subplot about Cartman trying to force Kyle to literally follow through on a bet in the most Cartman way possible. And the whole thing builds to a climax that's both ridiculous and oddly emotional. The trilogy was later compiled into the Imagination Land movie with additional footage, and that version won the Emmy. Let's spend some more time on the show's approach to religion because it's one of the most consistent and interesting through lines in the series. South Park has satirized Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism, Scientology, Islam, Buddhism, and pretty much every other major religion at some point during its run. But what's interesting is that the show doesn't approach religion from a position of atheism or anti-religion. Parker and Stone have both said in interviews that they're not opposed to religious belief itself. They're opposed to the hypocrisy, corruption, and rigid thinking that they see in organized religious institutions. And that distinction shows up in the writing. Jesus Christ is a literal recurring character on South Park. He lives in the town, hosts a public access TV show, and occasionally gets involved in major plot events. He's portrayed as a generally good person who happens to be the Son of God and is frequently frustrated by how his message has been distorted by the institutions that claim to represent him. It's a surprisingly nuanced portrayal for a show that also features a talking piece of Christmas poop. The Super Best Friends episode, one of the 5 banned ones, actually had a really interesting premise. It featured a team of religious figures, including Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and others, working together as a superhero team. The concept was that all of these religious leaders were friends who put aside their differences to fight evil. It was actually a weirdly positive message about interfaith cooperation, packaged in the typical South Park format of crude humor and absurd scenarios. The episode aired in 2001 without controversy. It was only years later, in the wake of the Muhammad cartoon controversies in Europe and the threats surrounding episodes 200 and 201, that Super Best Friends was pulled from circulation. The fantastic Easter special from season 11 is another religion-heavy episode that's worth talking about. It's essentially South Park's take on the Da Vinci Code, with Stan discovering that the secret of Easter involves a conspiracy connecting Leonardo da Vinci, the Hair Club for Men, a spoof of Masonic lodges, and the revelation that St. Peter was actually a rabbit. The Pope's mitre is shaped the way it is to accommodate rabbit ears. It's completely ridiculous, obviously, but the episode commits to its conspiracy theory premise with the same intensity that Dan Brown brought to his novels, and the result is one of the funniest parodies the show has ever done. Seasons 5 through 11 are generally considered the golden era of South Park by both fans and critics. These are the seasons that consistently dominate highest-rated episode lists and represent the show at its creative peak. The writing during this period was sharper, the satire was more focused, and the character development was at its best. Episodes like Scott Tenorman Must Die, Make Love Not Warcraft, Trapped in the Closet, Imagination Land, and the Cartoon Wars 2-parter all came from this era. If you're looking for a starting point to get into South Park, most longtime fans will point you to this stretch of seasons. But even outside the golden era, the show has produced some genuinely excellent work. The pandemic specials from season 24 were praised for their timely and savage commentary on the COVID response. The Paramount Plus specials have explored formats and themes that the regular series can't accommodate in 22 minutes. And recent seasons have continued to find new angles on topics that other shows would consider too risky or too complicated to tackle. Let's circle back one more time to the merchandise and cultural impact, because there are a few more details here that I find fascinating. The fact that South Park merchandise generated over $250 million in retail sales by the year 2000 is impressive on its own. But what makes it even more remarkable is the context. In 1999, South Park character t-shirts were literally the #1 selling specialty shirt in the United States. Not among animated show merchandise, not among Comedy Central products, the #1 specialty shirt in the entire country. That's how quickly the show penetrated mainstream culture. 3 years after its premiere, South Park was outselling every other brand of novelty t-shirt in America. The Cheesy Poofs collaboration with Frito-Lay is another example of how the show's fictional world has bled into reality. In 2011, Comedy Central worked with Frito-Lay to produce 1.5 million bags of the fictional snack and sell them at Walmart stores. The bags featured Cartman on the packaging and tasted by most accounts like cheese puffs. It was a marketing stunt, obviously, but it was also a genuine product that you could eat, which is more than most fictional TV food can claim. And the fact that they sold 1.5 million bags suggests that there's a significant overlap between South Park fans and Walmart shoppers, which is probably not the demographic crossover that either brand expected. The show's influence on political discourse is another topic that deserves more attention than we've given it. We mentioned the South Park Republican concept, but the show's political impact goes deeper than that. Parker and Stone have consistently positioned themselves as equal opportunity satirists. They've gone after liberals and conservatives with equal enthusiasm. They mocked Al Gore with Man, Bear, Pig. They mocked George Bush with the War on Terror episodes. They mocked Obama's election with the heist parody. And they mocked Trump by turning Mr. Garrison into a thinly veiled parody of his campaign and presidency. The show's political stance can be summed up as, everyone is a hypocrite, and the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. This approach has earned the show criticism from both ends of the political spectrum, which Parker and Stone seem to view as a sign that they're doing something right. In their view, if both sides are angry at you, you're probably hitting close to the truth. Whether you agree with that philosophy or not, it's been a consistent creative principle throughout the show's run, and it's one of the reasons South Park has remained relevant through multiple administrations and cultural shifts. The show's use of music is another underappreciated element. Parker, who studied music in college, has written dozens of original songs for the show over the years. Some of them are silly throwaway gags, but others are genuinely well-composed pieces that stand on their own as music. The chef character, voiced by Isaac Hayes, performed several original songs during his time on the show. The theatrical movie is a full musical with Broadway-quality compositions, and individual episodes have featured everything from opera parodies to rock ballads to hip-hop tracks, all written by Parker and his collaborators. The Chef Aid album, released in 1998 under the title Chef Aid, the South Park album, was a real commercially released soundtrack that featured original songs from the show alongside contributions from artists like Elton John, Ozzy Osbourne, Meat Loaf, and Primus. The fact that a soundtrack album for a cartoon about potty-mouthed kids attracted that caliber of musical talent tells you a lot about how quickly South Park established itself as a cultural force. And then there's the 25th anniversary concert, which took place in 2022 and was broadcast in full. Primus performed the theme song live, and the event brought together fans and contributors from across the show's history to celebrate a quarter century of South Park. 25 years of a show that was never supposed to last more than a season or two. 25 years of pushing boundaries, breaking records, and somehow still finding new things to say about the world. When you step back and look at the full scope of what South Park has accomplished, it's kind of staggering. This is a show that was created by 2 college students with no budget and no connections. It started as a Christmas card. It was almost never picked up because of a talking piece of poop. And it went on to become one of the most important, most controversial, most awarded, and most enduring television programs in history. It has produced 338 episodes, generated billions of dollars in revenue, won every major award in the industry, been banned in multiple countries, changed the way animated shows are produced, influenced political discourse, coined new terms in the English language, and created characters that are instantly recognizable around the world. And it all comes back to two guys in Colorado who liked Monty Python and had access to some construction paper. All right, now I really am done. For real this time. No more bonus content, no more one more thing. This is it. 100 South Park Easter eggs and facts, plus a whole bunch of extra stuff I couldn't help myself from including. If you're still listening, you either really love South Park or you have a very serious problem with falling asleep. Either way, I hope this helped. I hope you learned something new, and I hope, if nothing else, the gentle sound of someone talking about a cartoon for 90 minutes gave your brain permission to shut off for the night. Thanks for listening. Sweet dreams. And remember, if you see any gray aliens in your peripheral vision, just ignore them. They've been there the whole time. Okay, I lied. One more section. But this is truly the last one, and it's specifically for the people who are still awake and want to go even deeper. Consider this the post-credits scene. Let's talk about some of the quieter, more obscure facts that didn't quite fit into the main 100, but are too interesting to leave out entirely. The show's relationship with the MPAA is a story in itself. When Parker and Stone were making the 1999 movie, they had to submit it to the Motion Picture Association of America for a rating. They wanted an R rating. The MPAA gave them an NC-17, which is basically a commercial death sentence for a theatrical release. So Parker and Stone went back, re-edited the film, and submitted it again. NC-17 again. They did this multiple times, going back and forth with the MPAA, each time making small changes and each time getting rejected. What they eventually figured out was that the MPAA would tell them the movie was too offensive, but wouldn't tell them specifically which parts needed to be changed. It was a guessing game. They'd cut something, submit it, get rejected, and have no idea whether the thing they cut was the problem or not. This experience shaped their views on censorship and ratings boards, and you can see echoes of their frustration with the MPAA in multiple episodes of the show, particularly in the way the show satirizes authority figures who enforce arbitrary rules without transparency. The title of the movie, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, is itself an innuendo that apparently flew right over the heads of the marketing department. Parker and Stone have said they were surprised it was approved as a title. It's the kind of joke that works on two levels. On the surface, it describes the movie being bigger and longer than a regular episode and uncut by censors. On the other level, well, you can figure that out yourself. The fact that this title made it through the marketing approval process at Paramount Pictures is honestly one of the funniest Easter eggs in the entire franchise. Let me tell you a bit more about the specific controversies that individual episodes have generated, because some of these stories are fascinating in their own right. The Season 9 episode Bloody Mary, the one about the menstruating Virgin Mary statue, generated protests from the Catholic League that went well beyond standard television criticism. The Catholic League president William Donahue became a recurring antagonist in real life for the show, publicly criticizing multiple episodes and calling for boycotts. His activism eventually inspired the show to include Donahue as an actual character in the Season 11 episode Fantastic Easter Special, where he's portrayed as a power-hungry religious figure who opposes the revelation that St. Peter was a rabbit. The show's creators have never been shy about turning their real-world critics into characters, and Donahue's inclusion in the show was a direct response to his real-world campaigns against South Park. The Steve Irwin incident is another notable controversy. In the Season 10 Halloween episode Hell on Earth 2006, which aired just weeks after Steve Irwin's death from a stingray attack, the show featured Irwin at Satan's Halloween party with a stingray still attached to his chest. Irwin's fans and family were upset, and there was significant backlash from Australian audiences in particular. Parker and Stone have generally maintained that nothing is off limits in satire, but this is one case where the timing made the joke especially painful for a lot of viewers. The Season 5 episode It Hits the Fan, with its 162 uncensored uses of the word shit, has a backstory that makes it even more interesting. The episode was a direct response to the fact that the broadcast standards had recently been loosened to allow mild profanity on basic cable during certain hours. Parker and Stone's response was essentially to ask, "Oh, you'll let us say it now? Fine, we'll say it 162 times." The on-screen counter-tracking each usage was both a joke and a commentary on the absurdity of censorship standards that draw arbitrary lines about which words are acceptable and which aren't. The episode argued through extreme excess that the word itself becomes meaningless when you hear it enough times, and that the power of language comes from context rather than from specific forbidden syllables. The show's treatment of video games extends beyond just the official South Park games. South Park has parodied gaming culture extensively throughout its run. The World of Warcraft episode is the most famous example, but the show has also tackled Guitar Hero, Minecraft, Fortnite, and the culture of gaming addiction in various episodes. The Black Friday trilogy from Season 17 built its entire plot around the console wars between Xbox and PlayStation, turning a Thanksgiving shopping event into a Game of Thrones-style epic battle over which gaming system the boys would ask their parents to buy. It was a perfect example of how the show takes something relatively trivial and escalates it to absurd proportions while simultaneously making a larger point about consumer culture. The show's handling of the transgender debate has evolved over the show's lifetime in ways that reflect broader cultural shifts. Mrs. Garrison's gender transition arc, which ran across several seasons, was treated primarily as a source of comedy. But in later seasons, the show's approach became more nuanced, acknowledging the complexity of gender identity even while still mining the topic for humor. The Season 18 episode The Sissy, which dealt with Cartman pretending to be transgender to use the girls' bathroom, managed to be both funny and surprisingly thoughtful in its treatment of the subject. The show doesn't always get it right by modern standards, and it's been criticized for some of its portrayals. But the fact that it engages with these topics at all puts it ahead of most other animated comedies. Parker and Stone's personal lives have influenced the show in ways that go beyond just naming characters after family members. Stone is Jewish, like Kyle's family, and much of the show's commentary on Judaism and anti-Semitism comes from that personal connection. Parker's background in music has shaped not just the show's original songs, but its overall approach to storytelling rhythm and pacing. And both creators' experience growing up in Colorado informs the show's setting, its portrayal of small-town American life, and its particular brand of Mountain West cynicism toward coastal elite culture. The show's future looks secure for the foreseeable future, which is remarkable for a show that many people thought would only last a season or two when it first premiered. The $1.5 billion deal with Paramount Global guarantees roughly 10 episodes per year through at least 2029 or 2030. That means South Park will be on the air for at least 32 to 33 years by the time the current deal expires. It will have produced well over 350 episodes. And knowing Parker and Stone, they'll probably sign another deal after that. These are two guys who have been doing this since their early 20s, and they're now in their mid-50s. South Park is their life's work, and they've shown no signs of being done with it. The most recent seasons have continued to evolve the show in interesting ways. Season 27 featured a highly serialized narrative centered on a caricature of Donald Trump during his second administration, depicting what the show characterized as an abusive relationship between Trump and Satan. Season 28 followed with an arc about the boys becoming obsessed with an internet meme, which somehow connected to billionaire Peter Thiel investigating the meme as a potential antichrist cult, and Trump and J.D. Vance conspiring to secretly abort Satan's baby. And if that sentence sounds completely insane to you, congratulations. You now understand what modern South Park is like. The show has only gotten weirder and more ambitious as it's aged, which is the opposite of what happens to most long-running series. The season 28 finale, called The Crap Out, aired on December 10th, 2025, and drew 0.46 million viewers. That's a far cry from the 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers that the most watched episodes in the show's history pulled in during its late 1990s peak. But in the modern streaming era, traditional viewership numbers tell an incomplete story. The show's cross-platform numbers are much higher, and the season 27 episode Got a Nut pulled approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers within 3 days, making it the most watched South Park episode since 2018. The fact that South Park can still generate those kinds of numbers after 28 years on the air speaks to the enduring appeal of the show and its creators' ability to keep the material fresh. Very few creative properties in any medium have maintained cultural relevance for this long. The Simpsons is the obvious comparison, having been on the air since 1989. But South Park's 6-day production cycle gives it a responsiveness to current events that The Simpsons can't match. Saturday Night Live is another long-running satirical program, but it operates in a completely different format. South Park occupies a unique position in the television landscape, and it has for nearly 3 decades. All right, for real this time, that's everything I've got. Every fact, every Easter egg, every tangent and deep dive and bonus detail that I could think of. If you've been listening this whole time, you now know more about South Park than probably 99% of the people who watch it. And if you fell asleep an hour ago, you had a really nice nap accompanied by a very thorough history lesson about a cartoon. Either way, thanks for being here. This has been 100 South Park Easter eggs and facts to fall asleep to. I'll be back with more of these soon. Until then, take care of yourself, get some rest. And remember, 28 years ago, 2 guys with scissors and construction paper created something that would outlast most marriages, most careers, and most political administrations. And they did it all for the cost of a Christmas card. Good night for real. I mean it this time. I'm not coming back. The video is over. Go to sleep. Okay, I know I said the video was over, but I just thought of a few more things, and this is a sleep video, so who's gonna complain? If you're asleep, you can't hear this anyway. And if you're awake, well, here's some more South Park knowledge for you. Let me tell you about some of the episode title Easter eggs that most people walk right past. South Park has a long history of naming episodes after movies, songs, and cultural references. The Season 2 episode City on the Edge of Forever shares its name with one of the most famous Star Trek episodes ever made. And the South Park version, which is a clip show done in flashback format, actually mirrors some of the themes from the Star Trek episode about memory and altered timelines. The Planetarium episode from an earlier season is also based on a Star Trek, the original series episode called Dagger of the Mind. So there's a whole layer of Star Trek references baked into the DNA of South Park that only Trek fans would catch. The show also has a tradition of hiding jokes in background signage and written text that moves by too fast for most viewers to read. Restaurant menus, newspaper headlines, computer screens, posters on bulletin boards. All of these can contain hidden jokes or references that reward viewers who pause and read them carefully. The internet has cataloged hundreds of these over the years, and new ones are still being discovered in older episodes. It's the kind of attention to detail that you don't expect from a show that's made in 6 days, but the animation team clearly uses whatever time they have to pack in as many background gags as possible. One of the most interesting production details that we haven't discussed is how the show handles its musical score. The original score was composed by Adam Berry during the early seasons, and then later the scoring duties were taken over by Scott Nicholly and Jamie Dunlap from approximately 2008 onward. For the theatrical movie, Trey Parker worked with Mark Shaman, who is a legitimate Hollywood composer with credits that include When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and The Addams Family. The collaboration between Parker's comedic sensibility and Shaman's orchestral expertise is a big part of why the movie's music works so well. The songs feel like genuine Broadway numbers with complex arrangements and clever lyrics while still being laugh-out-loud funny. Parker himself performed many of the songs in the movie and throughout the series, often voicing multiple characters in the same musical number. When you hear Cartman singing about Kyle's mom being a certain unflattering word in the movie, That's Parker doing both the singing voice and the speaking voice, switching between characters mid-scene. The vocal dexterity required to do that, especially in musical passages, is something that doesn't get enough credit when people talk about the show's production. Let me also mention the show's approach to censorship within the episodes themselves because it's actually pretty clever. South Park uses different methods to censor different types of content, and each method is itself a kind of running joke. When characters swear, the words are bleeped with a standard television censor tone. But in the episode Sailor Mouth from SpongeBob, wait, no, I'm thinking of the wrong show. In South Park specifically, the approach to censorship varies by episode and context. In It Hits the Fan, the word shit was deliberately not censored as part of the episode's entire premise. In 201, substantial portions of dialogue were bleeped by the network against the creator's wishes, and those bleeps have never been removed from the official version of the episode. The show also uses visual censorship as a creative tool. In Cartoon Wars, a black screen reading Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network, appeared in place of what would have been a depiction of the Prophet. Whether this was an actual network decision or a joke by Parker and Stone has been the subject of debate for years. The ambiguity is intentional, and it adds another layer to the show's commentary on censorship and self-censorship in media. The evolution of Mr. Garrison is worth touching on one more time because it's one of the most unusual character arcs in television history. Garrison started as the boys' closeted gay teacher in season 1. Over the course of the show, he came out as gay, had a sex change operation, and became Mrs. Garrison, became a lesbian, transitioned back to being male, and eventually became a thinly veiled parody of Donald Trump, who actually became president of the United States within the show's fiction. That is one of the wildest character journeys in any television show, animated or otherwise. And through all of it, the character has remained recognizably the same person, which is a testament to how well Parker voices him and how consistently the character's core personality traits have been maintained despite the external changes. The show's approach to Canada is another long-running joke that has evolved into genuine world-building. Canadians in South Park are depicted with flapping Pac-Man-style heads, beady eyes, and a distinctly different animation style from the rest of the characters. They speak with exaggerated accents and live in a version of Canada that operates on completely different logic than the rest of the world. Terrence and Phillip, the farting Canadian comedians who are beloved by the boys, have been a part of the show since season 1 and became central to the movie's plot. Over time, the show has built an entire fictional version of Canadian society, complete with its own government, its own cultural institutions, and its own prince and princess, who parody real-life figures. The Canadian segments of South Park have become their own mini-universe within the larger show, with their own continuity, their own recurring characters, and their own visual style. I could honestly keep going. There are hundreds more details, Easter eggs, and behind-the-scenes stories about this show. But at some point, even a sleep video has to end. So let me leave you with one final thought. South Park has been on the air for 28 years. In that time, it has produced some of the funniest, most controversial, most socially relevant, and most creatively ambitious television ever made. It has done things that no other show would dare to do. It has survived controversies that would have ended any other program. It has evolved from a crude curiosity into a genuine cultural institution. And it has done all of this while being made in 6 days by a relatively small team using animation software that's designed to make everything look like it was cut out of construction paper. The hidden aliens are still there. Kenny is still dying and coming back. The theme song is still playing. And somewhere in Culver City, California, Trey Parker is probably staring at a blank page on a Thursday morning, trying to figure out what this week's episode is going to be about. That's South Park. That's the whole story. And now, finally, truly, for the very last time, good night. And because I apparently cannot stop myself from adding just one more layer to this thing, here are a handful of bonus micro facts that I've been sitting on this entire video. Consider these the end credits, Easter eggs of this Easter eggs video. The show had a brief tradition of including a production company jingle at the end of early episodes. The Brainiff production card featured that 12-note xylophone melody we mentioned earlier, and it appeared consistently through the first 2 seasons before being phased out. If you go back and listen to the very end of Season 1 and Season 2 episodes, right after the credits finish, you'll hear this cheerful little tune that feels completely at odds with whatever chaos just unfolded in the episode. It's such a small detail, but it's one of those things that makes rewatching the early seasons feel special. Those little production touches are from an era when South Park was still a scrappy new show trying to find its voice, and hearing them takes you right back to that time. The Stick of Truth video game contained a reference within a reference that's worth pointing out. When you visit Koopa Keep and interact with the character Tolkien, he's in charge of the armory, and his in-game name for the role-playing scenario is Tolkien, which at the time of the game's release in 2014 was read by players as a reference to J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. But this was years before the TV show officially revealed that the character's actual name was always Tolkien, not Tolkien. So the video game was actually using his correct name before the show itself addressed the distinction. Whether that was intentional foreshadowing or a happy coincidence is something only the writers know for sure. The show has a running background detail where Jimbo's Guns, the gun shop owned by Stan's Uncle Jimbo, can be spotted in various establishing shots of the town. And in many of those shots, if you look carefully, you can find a hidden alien lurking behind the store. Jimbo's Guns has become one of the most reliable hiding spots for the visitor aliens, appearing in alien hunting databases as a frequent location across multiple seasons. Comedy Central's first broadcast of South Park was on August 13, 1997 at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. The show debuted to enormous ratings, consistently earning the highest numbers of any basic cable program during its early run. The peak of its traditional viewership came with the Season 1 and Season 2 cliffhanger episodes about Cartman's parentage. The 2-part Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut and Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut pulled approximately 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers with an 8.2 Nielsen rating. Those were the most watched episodes in the show's history for years, and they remain a benchmark for how big South Park was at the height of its late 90s cultural moment. The show has been the subject of academic study in a way that few other animated comedies have matched. South Park and Philosophy, published as part of the Popular Culture and Philosophy book series, includes essays examining the show through the lenses of ethics, political philosophy, existentialism, and epistemology. There are university courses that use South Park episodes as teaching materials for media studies, political science, and cultural criticism. The show has been cited in peer-reviewed journals and discussed at academic conferences. For a program that built its reputation on toilet humor and profanity, being taken seriously by the academic community is either a testament to its depth or a commentary on the state of academia, depending on your perspective. Parker and Stone would probably say it's both. The show has also made its mark on language in ways that extend beyond catchphrases. The word derp, which has become common internet slang, was popularized by South Park through the character of Mr. Derp. The phrase "going down to South Park" has entered the cultural lexicon as a euphemism for entering a situation that's about to get chaotic or absurd. Integrity, obviously misspelling integrity, became a widely used internet reference to questionable corporate ethics. One final thought. The number of people who have worked on South Park over its 28-year run is in the hundreds. Animators, writers, editors, sound engineers, voice actors, production assistants, musicians, executives, and support staff have all contributed to making this show what it is. Trey Parker and Matt Stone are the creative heart of the franchise, but the 6-day production cycle only works because of the dozens of skilled professionals who commit to an insane schedule week after week, season after season. The show is a collaborative achievement, and while the spotlight rightly falls on Parker and Stone, The broader South Park team deserves recognition for making the impossible possible on a weekly basis for nearly 3 decades. And that truly is everything. Every fact, every Easter egg, every behind-the-scenes detail, every tangent, aside, and bonus round I could think of. This has been 100 South Park Easter eggs and facts to fall asleep to. I hope your eyes are heavy. I hope your mind is quiet. And I hope the next time you watch an episode of South Park, you see it just a little bit differently. Good night for the absolute, unequivocal final time. Good night. Oh, and one more thing I almost forgot. You know how I mentioned that Parker and Stone offered Primus $74 and a VHS tape to write the theme song? Well, the fact that Primus said yes to that deal, recorded a theme that has been heard billions of times across almost 3 decades of television, and presumably never renegotiated for more money, is itself a kind of Easter egg about the music industry. Les Claypool could have asked for royalties. He could have demanded a percentage of the show's revenue. Instead, he took $74 and a copy of a student film, and he created one of the most iconic theme songs in television history. Somewhere there's a lesson in that about the difference between doing something for the money and doing something because it's funny. Parker, Stone, and Claypool all chose funny. And 28 years later, the joke is still playing at 144 beats per minute every single week in front of millions of people. That's the spirit of South Park. Do the thing because it's funny. Figure out the rest later. Now go to sleep. I mean it.